Hey guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan, and today I'm going to be talking about the books I read in June 2019. In June, I actually read 11 books. I finished 11 books. This is my record for 2019. I didn't mean for it to be a record. I didn't do anything special. I guess I just read a few books that were shorter than other books that I read in the previous months or something, so it just added up to 11. Anyway, because there are 11, I'm gonna try to keep my comments on each of the books quite brief, so this doesn't go on for too long, just mostly because as a viewer of booktube, I don't like videos that are too long, so I wouldn't want to inflict a long video on you guys. So yeah, it was an eclectic month. I read some books from the Canary Islands. I read some books from other Spanish-speaking countries in Spanish. I read some books in English, as I do, but not that many. And maybe that was why I read so much. Maybe because most of the books were in Spanish, and perhaps I read faster in Spanish. I don't know. I just thought of that right now, looking at the list of books. And I read a couple of books in Portuguese. So I'm gonna start off by talking about the books in English, and then the ones in Spanish, and then the ones in Portuguese. Okay, so in English I read very little. I actually read just 2 books. I read As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, and I made a video review of this book. So it was a difficult book, like all of Faulkner's. I want to get through Faulkner before the end of the year, and by getting through Faulkner, I don't mean getting through all his books, but just getting through the main 4 or 5 novels that he wrote that everybody has heard about, but very few people have actually read. So yeah, if you want to see my view, if you want to see my views on this novel, just go ahead and check out the my video review after you've seen this wrap up. Please don't go right now, but after you've seen this, go and watch As I Lay Dying. And then I also read De Profundis, which is the long letter that Oscar Wilde wrote from jail, in which he addressed that letter to his lover, Bosie, and I also made a video of this, so again, go and check it out if you're interested on my reaction to De Profundis by Oscar Wilde. So these were my 2 books in English. Then I read in Spanish, and I read a few books from the Canary Islands. So I'm gonna talk about them briefly. I read Cerveza de Grano Rojo by the writer Rafaela Rosarena, who was born in my home island of Tenerife. And I did not like it. I found it to be a hugely experimental book, to the point that it was hard to see the point of it, or to kind of follow what he was. I'm all right with experimentation. I'm all right with anything. I think what's important as a reader is to understand what the writer is trying to do, and then you can assess whether she or he is successful at that. But not, never, it's not fair to dislike a book because it's not what you thought it would be, or because it doesn't fit into your more or less narrow view of what a novel should do. But you should try to understand what the writer was doing, and that comes from experience, from reading, literary theory, from reading, you don't even have to read literary theory, I mean, just from reading as many books as possible from many writers in many different countries and different, literary movements and so on. With this one, it was hard for me to know what he was doing. And it wasn't all I can say is that it wasn't a pleasurable experience. But I'm glad I actually finished the book. And then I read 2 books by a writer called Juan Manuel Garcia Ramos, also from my home island of Tenerife. In this case, he's alive. Rosarena, as far as I know, isn't, but Juan Manuel Garcia Ramos is. And he's now in politics. He's a member of our national parliament here in the Canary Islands. I have no opinions of him as a politician, or perhaps I do, but I'm sure you don't care to hear them. But I read 2 of his most famous books, Malaquita and El Inglés. And again, I just couldn't see what he was trying to do, and I got upset that the book seemed to be set here in Tenerife, and yet all the names of all the places were made up, so I didn't know why he was doing that. And I just couldn't recognize Tenerife in his writing, and that was one of the reasons why I picked him up. But then I read a great novel called Los Puercos de Circe, and so it's Circe's pigs. As you know, Circe is that mythological figure that turned men into pigs. So this is nothing to do with that. It's just you know, he uses that myth as an inspiration. But this book is a realist novel from, I believe, the 1970s. Yeah, and in which he, Luis Alemán, that's the name of the writer. He's now, I believe, a retired literature professor, and he's also from Tenerife. And in this book, this is the first novel ever in which I've seen the Tenerife that I recognize and the Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is the capital city of Tenerife and of the Canary Islands, together with Las Palmas. So this is the first time that I recognize my hometown and my, you know, my city and my island in literature. And I love this novel, but it left me feeling really sad, because the way he talks about the pettiness and how provincial our morals are, and you know, it was an interesting exercise for me as a local person to read this novel, because I realized how far we've come and also how far we are yet to go. Beyond that, I don't know if this book will be of much interest to readers. I don't believe it's been translated into English or any other languages, but it's available in Spanish, at least here in the Canary Islands, and I'm assuming in Spain too, so you can probably get it online. But I'm not sure, unless you're interested in the things I'm interested in, because I'm from, you know, from Tenerife, and you want to see what the real Tenerife is for people who are here, so you want to go beyond all that tourist bullcrap, you know, that we put out, and you know, the sunshine and the beaches and the cheap alcohol and all of that, and want to see how people who live here feel and how life here is, or at least was in the late 70s, then I recommend it. There's some stuff here about the university as well. We have a university nearby, La Laguna, and that's my alma mater. And yeah, it was almost painful to read, but I don't know of how much interest that would be to anyone else. But it, you know, for all I know, I may have viewers from Tenerife, so I would recommend it to those. Let me see, then I think that was it with literature from the Canary Islands, but I read more in Spanish. I read Aura, or Aura, by Carlos Fuentes. Carlos Fuentes is a hugely famous, or was, a Mexican writer, and Aura is a short story or a novella. I'm not sure how to class it, or somewhere in between. It's a terror story. That comes hugely recommended, you know. It's one of the best. I don't love terror. It's not something that I read, and I still enjoyed it hugely. I read it in the original Spanish as part of this book called Cuentos Sobrenaturales, that's it. Supernatural Tales would be the literal translation, but I think it's been published in its own as well, and possibly as part of other collections. And it's been translated into English and into probably dozens of other languages, so this one is available in English. I read it in Spanish, and I made a video review in Spanish, so if you speak Spanish, even if you only speak high school Spanish, I try to speak slowly and as clearly as possible in Spanish, so you might be able to follow my review, so I recommend you go check it out. Of course, if you speak Spanish, then you should already have done it. But yeah, this book is highly recommended by me, so go read it, Aura, or Aura, by Carlos Fuentes. Then I also read, by the same author, his book El Naranjo. This is a collection of 4 different novellas, in which the leitmotif is an orange tree. That's El Naranjo from the title. El Naranjo means orange tree. And I also recommend it. I think it's a great book. A lot of it's historical, about the conquest of Mexico by Spain, also some Spanish history, some Roman history, and some a view on contemporary Mexico. So this is recommended if you're interested in Carlos Fuentes and Latin American literature. And there's no magical realism in it, which is a plus, probably for some of you. Then I also read Julio Cortázar, Las Armas Secretas and Other Stories. Julio Cortázar was a writer from Argentina, and he's most famous for his short stories. This collection includes some of his best short stories. My favorite is the La Isla al Mediodía, or The Island at Noon. He has been translated into English and many other languages, so this is available. Secret Weapons and Other Tales. Just look for Julio Cortázar. He's always worth reading. And then I read 2 books in Portuguese, which I have here on my bookshelf, and I forgot to take them before setting up the camera, so apologies for the wobbly camera there for a second. So I read Dom Casmurro, which is a Brazilian classic by Machado de Assis. I loved it. I made a video review of this in Portuguese, but it's been translated into English, and I recommend it. It's one of the best books I've ever read. For 19th century classic, so if you like 19th century literature, then Machado de Assis is your guy. And then I read Para Sempre, or Forever, by Portuguese writer Virgílio Ferreira. I also made a video review of this book in Portuguese, and I loved it. It was a lyrical novel. It's not a linear narrative. It has beautiful Portuguese. I don't know if it has been translated, but if you can read in Portuguese or even in Spanish and want to be challenged slightly, this also comes recommended, but it's a difficult book, so beware of that. And I believe those were the... No, there's still one more. Okay, I've got so many books here, you guys. That's why I forgot. Okay, so the last book that I read actually there are 2 more. I read another book in Spanish, so apologies for that, because I should have talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, but I read La Familia de Pascual Duarte, or Pascual Duarte's Family. This is a Spanish classic from the 1940s. It's by Nobel Prize winner Camilo José Cela. Hugely recommended. Hard book, but I couldn't stop reading it. I read it overnight, and I will read it again. It's amazing. And then I also read another classic called San Manuel Bueno Mártir, which is a novella by Basque writer Miguel de Unamuno, which is about a crisis of faith by a Spanish priest. It may seem a little bit out of dated because Christian faith doesn't occupy the big space that it did in that, at that time, particularly in Spain, and by that time I mean the first half of the 20th century. But I think it's still a beautiful prose. It's a book that I had to read in high school, and I loved it then, and I wanted to reread it, and I'm so glad I did. I want to read more by Miguel de Unamuno. Again, he's a Spanish classic, so he's been translated into other languages. You should be able to find this book and other books by him in English. I want to read more about him, so you'll hear me. Hopefully I will develop a more a solid critical approach on his books in future videos. So I think my camera is about to die, and I've already gone through all my books, so I'm gonna leave it here. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. Please leave a message with your opinions on what you've been reading this month, and I hope to see you again very soon. Bye.